Imagine losing the great love of your life, spending years trapped in a pain that no one can understand, living each day as a shadow of what once was. Now, imagine looking into the face of a stranger and seeing there, in front of you, the person you thought was dead. That's exactly what happened to Leo. He was used to emptiness. Ever since he lost Clara, his wife, nothing made sense anymore. The restaurant that had once been a dream became a mausoleum of memories. Time passed, but the grief remained. Then one night, a new employee walked through the doors of La Belle Étoile. Leo's heart stopped. She didn't just look like Clara. She was Clara. Or was it just his mind playing tricks? What began as a chance encounter quickly became an obsession, an enigma impossible to ignore. Isabella, the new waitress, remembered nothing about him. But her gestures, her looks, even a scar on her wrist, everything about her screamed an impossible truth. Now Leo has to find out, is he facing a cruel coincidence or a miracle that defies logic? And what about Isabella? What will happen when the memories start coming back? Get ready for a story that defies fate, where love and the past collide in a way that no one could have predicted. Because some souls are never truly lost, and some love stories never end. The lights of La Belle Étoile glowed softly against the snow piled up on the sidewalk. The cold New York winter was biting, but inside, the restaurant exuded warmth and sophistication. The clink of cutlery, the murmur of elegant conversation, and the aroma of finely prepared dishes blended into a welcoming atmosphere. Leo was sitting at a far table, his gaze lost in the glass of wine in front of him. 3 years ago, this restaurant had been his refuge, his home, his world. But now, it was just a constant reminder of what he had lost. He barely took part in the day-to-day operations, leaving his managers to take care of everything. His only function seemed to be to exist there, trapped between the walls where the memories of a woman who would never return still echoed. The truth was that for him, nothing had any taste anymore, not even the restaurant that had once been his greatest passion. He just kept it going, perhaps out of stubbornness, perhaps because he still didn't know how to say goodbye to everything he had once shared with Clara. The refined atmosphere, the soft music, the elaborate dishes, everything there seemed lifeless to him. But that night, something different was about to happen, something that would wake him up from the state of numbness in which he lived. "Sir," the voice of the manager, Andre, brought him back. I'd like to introduce you to the new employee." Leo raised his eyes in disinterest. He didn't care about new hires. That kind of detail was irrelevant to him. Still, as a mere formality, he nodded. "Isabella, come here, please." She appeared between the tables, walking lightly. She wore a simple black dress, an apron tied impeccably around her waist, and her hair tied up neatly. Her face was slightly flushed from the effort of her work and the heat of the kitchen. But that wasn't what caught Leo. It was something much deeper. Time seemed to fold in on itself. An invisible punch hit his chest, taking his breath away. His eyes glazed over, and for a second he was sure that fate had gone mad. It was impossible. But she was there. She was. Leo gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. Isabella stopped in front of him and smiled shyly, unaware of the internal storm she had unleashed. "Good evening, sir. It's a pleasure to work here." The voice, the soft timbre, the exact intonation. Leo didn't reply. The restaurant disappeared around him. All that remained was her face. His heart was beating so loudly that he was sure Andre and Isabella could hear it. She noticed his intense gaze and frowned, annoyed. She moved her hands nervously, looking away. "I hope I can live up to expectations," she said, trying to keep her composure. Andre, unaware of the tension in the air, smiled with satisfaction. "I'm sure you'll do a great job, Isabella." "Well, sir, if you need anything, I'll be in the office." He walked away, leaving just the two of them standing there, staring at each other. Isabella sniffled, uncomfortable. "Can I get something for you, sir?" Leo wanted to talk, wanted to ask something, anything, but his mind was in chaos. The resemblance wasn't just an illusion. Every feature, every expression, the way she held the order pad, the way she fiddled with her hair when she felt uncomfortable, everything about her screamed an impossible truth. But Clara was dead. He blinked rapidly, breaking the trance. He needed to pull himself together. He needed to act like a rational man. "Water," he said at last. His voice sounded hoarse. Isabella nodded quickly and walked away. Leo watched her go to the bar and get a glass of water. A shiver ran down his spine. One thing was certain. This woman was no stranger. He just had to find out why. As she walked back, holding the glass of water, Leo tried hard to keep his expression neutral. He didn't want to frighten her. However, his mind was working feverishly. Could it just be a coincidence? Could it just be a physical resemblance that his brain, still drunk on longing, was turning into something bigger than it really was? He wanted to believe it. He needed to believe it. But then, when Isabella held out the glass to him, his hand shook slightly, just enough for a drop of water to run down the side of the glass. And Leo saw it. On the pale skin of her wrist, a thin scar, discreet but visible enough, exactly where Clara had had one. His chest tightened. The glass remained between them for a few seconds until he finally picked it up, taking a sip while trying to keep his composure. Isabella didn't seem to notice his reaction, but something in the way she looked around, analyzing every detail of the restaurant, made Leo sure of one thing. She wasn't just any employee. She wasn't a coincidence. Leo couldn't stop staring. Sitting at his table, he watched Isabella serve the customers with natural ease. The refined atmosphere of La Belle Étoile demanded impeccable service, and she seemed to fit in perfectly. Her discreet but efficient manner showed that she had experience, but that wasn't what intrigued him. There was something about her beyond the disturbing resemblance to Clara, something that went beyond her face, her tone of voice, or the way she tucked the loose strands of her hair behind her ear. It was the way she looked around, as if the place wasn't completely foreign to her. From time to time, as she walked between the tables, Isabella would stop for a few seconds and frown. She would run her fingers along the edge of a dark wooden chair, as if she felt something familiar. At times, she seemed lost in thought, but soon pulled herself together and got back to work. Leo tightened his fingers around the wine glass, watching her walk away towards the kitchen. He wasn't imagining things. His mind might be distorting reality because of the pain of loss, but that unsettling feeling wasn't a daydream. He knew how to recognize a connection when he felt one, and something inside him told him that Isabella was no stranger. Isabella rested her hands on the counter and took a deep breath. Her heart was racing, and she couldn't say why. Perhaps it was the nervousness of the first day, or maybe she bit her lower lip. Her boss's gaze was still burning into her skin. He hadn't treated her coldly, but there was something strange about the way he looked at her, as if he was studying her, trying to find something in her that made sense. She shifted her gaze to the restaurant's lounge, where customers were savoring their expensive dishes in the golden light of the chandeliers. Everything there seemed luxurious and elegant, but somehow it wasn't completely unfamiliar. Why did I feel this strange sense of déjà vu? It was as if he had been there before, as if her feet had already stepped on that floor, as if her skin had already felt the touch of the wood on the counter. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to shake off the feeling. Perhaps it was tiredness. Since arriving in New York, she had been working around the clock to stabilize herself. She couldn't let herself get carried away by paranoia. "Is everything all right?" asked one of the waiters passing by. She forced a smile and nodded. "Yes, I'm just getting the hang of it." He smiled, unaware of her discomfort, and went back to work. Leo couldn't concentrate on anything else. Even after trying to push the thoughts away, the image of Isabella remained fixed in his mind, that scar on her wrist. He remembered exactly how Clara had gotten it. A minor domestic accident when she was trying to cut a slice of bread. It had been so trivial, but the mark was there forever, and now Isabella had the same scar. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. It didn't make sense. Clara was dead. He had buried the love of his life 3 years ago. He remembered the funeral, the weight of the coffin, the empty condolences. He had seen with his own eyes the wreckage of the car in which she had crashed. So how was it possible? He looked at Isabella again, now serving at a table at the back of the restaurant. She turned quickly, and for an instant their gazes met. Leo saw the hesitation in her eyes. Something shone there, a restlessness, a doubt that she tried to hide. She felt it. Perhaps not in the same way as him, but something inside her also seemed disturbed. And Leo needed to find out why. When Isabella's shift ended, she said goodbye to her colleagues and walked to the changing room to get her coat. It had been a long day, but something inside her prevented her from relaxing. The silence of the corridor leading out of the restaurant seemed heavy, and then, as she turned the corner to leave, she ran into Leo. He was standing there near the door, his hands in the pockets of his well-cut suit. The air between them felt heavy for a moment. "Did you enjoy your first day?" His voice was low but firm. She nodded. "Yes, it's an amazing restaurant." Leo looked at her for a moment before stepping forward. "Have you been here before?" The question took her by surprise. She blinked a few times, confused. "No? Why?" He hesitated. He didn't want to seem crazy. "You seem familiar." Isabella forced a smile, trying to mask her annoyance. "I think I have an ordinary face." Leo knew it wasn't that, but for the moment he let it go. "If you need anything, talk to me." She nodded and left, feeling his gaze on her back. Outside, the icy wind cut into her skin. She pulled her coat over her body and walked down the sidewalk, trying to ignore the inexplicable tightness in her chest. Inside the restaurant, Leo was still standing in the same spot, watching her walk away through the snow. He could feel it. This was no mistake. The woman he thought he had lost 3 years ago. Perhaps she had never left, and he was about to find out why. Leo couldn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, the image of Isabella came back with full force. He tried to rationalize, to find a logical explanation for it all, but it was useless. The scar on her wrist, the restless look in her eyes, the feeling of familiarity that went beyond her physical appearance. Clara was dead. He saw the wreckage of the accident, followed the search for the body, attended the funeral, and yet Isabella was there. The clock struck 3 in the morning when he finally gave up trying to sleep. He got out of bed and walked to his office. It was dark and quiet, with only the dim light of a lamp illuminating the room. With a heavy sigh, he opened the bottom drawer of his desk and took out a hardcover notebook, Clara's old diary. He hadn't opened it for years. Since her death, he hadn't had the courage to revisit those pages. But now, something urged him to do so. Perhaps there was something there, some detail he had overlooked. He ran his fingers over the cover and finally opened to the first page. Clara's handwriting was delicate, elegant. "Today, Leo took me to see the restaurant. He seemed so excited, so full of plans. I've never seen him so passionate about anything other than the two of us." Leo smiled sadly. He remembered that day. La Belle Étoile was his dream, and Clara had always encouraged him. He turned a few more pages. Short accounts of everyday life, declarations of love, worries and dreams. Then something caught his eye, an entry made a few weeks before the accident. "I feel that something inside me is changing. Some memories come and go. Sometimes I have dreams that seem like memories from another life. I know it sounds crazy, but there are times when I don't recognize myself in the mirror." Leo frowned. He turned the page. "Today, when I looked at my reflection in the restaurant window, I felt that it wasn't me. For a second I saw someone else there. I don't know how to explain it. I'm scared." His heart raced. He never knew that. Clara never mentioned anything. He closed the diary and rubbed his face with his hands. What the hell was going on? Isabella arrived at the restaurant early that morning. Despite having had little sleep, she felt restless, as if something inside her was trying to wake her up. She entered the main hall and stopped for a moment, looking at every detail. The impeccable tables, the luxurious chandeliers, the dark wood counter. Something inside her stirred. She took a deep breath and walked over to the bar. She ran her hand over the cold marble top and closed her eyes. And then, like an electric shock running down her spine, a flash of memory surfaced. A soft laugh, the sound of a glass being placed on the surface, a warm touch on her hand. She opened her eyes abruptly, her heart racing. What was that? Was she delirious or remembering? Isabella. She turned around quickly and found Leo standing there watching her intently. "Good morning," she said, trying to disguise her nervousness. He took a few steps forward, his gaze intense. "Are you all right?" She nodded. "Yes. I was just admiring the restaurant. It's really beautiful." Leo held her gaze for a moment before replying. "Yes, it is." The silence between them was heavy. "Come with me," he said at last. She hesitated but followed in his footsteps. Leo led her into his office and closed the door behind them. "I want to know more about you," he said bluntly. She frowned. "What do you want to know?" "Your past, your history." Isabella shifted uncomfortably. "There's not much to tell. I've lived in several cities. I've always worked in restaurants and cafes. I don't have a family, at least not that I can remember." Leo narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean, not that I can remember?" She sighed. "I had an accident 3 years ago. I spent some time in hospital, and when I woke up, I didn't remember much." Leo's world spun. 3 years. The same amount of time since Clara died. "What happened in your accident?" His voice came out more tense than he intended. "I don't know. They found me injured on a road outside the city. There were no documents on me. All I know is that I survived and started again from scratch." The air seemed to disappear from the office. Leo felt the impact of that revelation like a punch in the gut. She had no memory of her past, and she had appeared just as Clara died. As Isabella walked back into the restaurant hall, she felt a weight on her chest. Why had telling Leo this made her so nervous? Perhaps because deep down she was afraid of what he might find out, or even worse, what she herself might remember. Leo felt like he was trapped in a maze with no way out. Isabella's words echoed in his mind like a distant bell, reverberating in the silence of his consciousness. "I had an accident 3 years ago. I didn't remember much." 3 years. The same period since Clara died. The same time since he lost everything. Coincidence? No. Leo never believed in coincidences. Something inside him screamed that there was more to this story, something buried under the veil of Isabella's fragmented memory. But how could he prove it? Isabella tried to concentrate on her work, but the restlessness in her chest grew by the minute. Ever since she left Leo's office, an uncomfortable feeling had settled over her. As if she was about to discover something she shouldn't have, as if there was a secret hidden inside her, waiting to be revealed. She felt his eyes on her. Every time she passed by his desk, she felt his attentive, analytical, penetrating gaze. He was trying to decipher her, and deep down, she was trying to decipher herself too. Why did this restaurant seem so familiar? Why did Leo's presence awaken something she couldn't explain? She took a deep breath, trying to push the thoughts away. But then she accidentally knocked over a tray. The sound of crashing plates echoed through the room, attracting curious glances and a frustrated sigh from the manager. Isabella closed her eyes for a moment, feeling a wave of embarrassment rise up inside her. "Isabella!" Andre, the manager, rushed up to her. "Is everything all right?" "Yes, I'm sorry. I got distracted." She bent down to pick up the shards, but before she could touch them, a firm hand grabbed her wrist. She looked up and met Leo's intense eyes. For a moment, everything seemed to fall silent around her. He stared at her with something other than concern. It was as if he was trying to see something that had been there all along, but which he had never noticed. She felt a shiver run down her spine. "Let someone else clean it up," he said, his voice low but authoritative. Isabella hesitated for a moment, but nodded. Leo kept his gaze on her for a moment longer before turning away, and Isabella had to fight the feeling that he knew something she didn't yet know. Leo couldn't ignore it any longer. He needed answers. That same evening, after the restaurant had closed, he picked up the phone and dialed the number of an old acquaintance. "I need you to find out information about someone for me." On the other end of the line, the experienced voice of a private investigator sounded with a slight tone of curiosity. "Name?" Leo hesitated for a second. "Isabella. I don't know your last name, but I do know that you had an accident 3 years ago and don't remember much. That's a start. Give me a few days." Leo hung up, feeling a weight settle on his shoulders. If Isabella was who he suspected, then everything he believed about Clara's death was about to change. The next morning, Isabella arrived at the restaurant a little earlier than usual. There was something inside her that pushed her to that place, as if the answers were there, as if something she had forgotten wanted to be remembered. Before the other employees arrived, she walked slowly through the silent hall. She ran her fingers over the dark wood of the tables, feeling a chill on her skin. Her feet took her to the bar counter. She stopped. She looked around, absorbing the details. And then, almost without realizing it, she ran her fingers over the marble top and closed her eyes. A glimpse, a scene, a glass of wine being placed there, a soft laugh, a voice calling her name. Her heart raced. She took a step back, her chest rising and falling rapidly. What was that? Was it a daydream or a memory? The sound of footsteps echoed through the restaurant, and she turned abruptly. Leo was there, standing near the entrance, watching her. The tension in the air was palpable. "You feel it, don't you?" he asked, walking slowly towards her. "What?" His voice came out shakier than he intended. "This place, this restaurant, this moment." He stopped a few centimeters away from her. "It all seems familiar to you, doesn't it?" She swallowed. I don't know." Leo kept his gaze on her, assessing every nuance of her expression. "You've been here before." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Isabella felt her skin crawl. She wanted to deny it. She wanted to say it was just a coincidence, but deep down, something inside her was beginning to awaken, and the truth was getting closer and closer. Leo couldn't deny it any longer. With each passing day, the signs became more evident. Isabella wasn't just a strange coincidence, a woman who vaguely resembled his late wife. No, it was something much deeper. She was connected to Clara in some way, and he needed to find out how. The phone rang in the middle of the afternoon. Leo answered quickly, recognizing the voice of the investigator on the other end of the line. "I've got some information about Isabella," he said. Leo's heart raced. "What did you find out?" "She was found on a road outside the city 3 years ago, injured and undocumented. She spent months in hospital before being transferred to a rehabilitation clinic. There was no record of any relatives or where she came from before that." Leo pressed the phone to his ear. "What about the accident?" The investigator paused before continuing. "There aren't many details, but the place where she was found was near the same road where his wife had the accident." Leo's blood ran cold. The same place, the same period, the same oblivion. It was impossible to ignore. "Find more. I want to know everything." He hung up, feeling the weight of the discovery crushing him. If Isabella was who he suspected, then everything he believed about Clara's death was wrong. Isabella tried to ignore the growing tension between her and Leo, but it was getting difficult. Ever since that strange conversation the night before, she had noticed that he was looking at her in a different way, as if he was trying to fit together pieces of a puzzle that even she didn't know existed. And to make matters worse, the flashes of memory were becoming more frequent. That morning, as she passed through the corridor leading to the office, she felt a strange sensation. as if she had walked there before, as if every detail of that place was part of something buried inside her. She stopped for a moment and closed her eyes. A new fragment of memory appeared, a hand holding hers, a soft laugh, the smell of wine and lavender. Her heart raced. She opened her eyes, taking a deep breath. What was happening to her? Leo couldn't wait. He had to talk to Isabella. He found her at the bar, organizing the glasses. "I need to talk to you," he said seriously. Isabella looked up and saw the intensity in his gaze. "About what?" Leo hesitated for a moment before answering. "About your past." She felt a chill. "I told you I don't remember much." "But you're starting to, aren't you?" The silence between them was heavy. Isabella looked away, uncertain. I don't know. I've had a few flashes, but—" "Isabella," Leo interrupted. "The place where you were found, the hospital where you stayed, it's all connected to the accident that killed my wife." Her eyes widened. The same place, the same place, the same period. She felt a knot in her stomach. "That doesn't make sense." Leo moved a little closer. "You feel like you've been here before. I can see it in your eyes." She couldn't answer, because, deep down, she knew he was right, and the truth was about to emerge. Leo felt he was on the verge of something big, something that could change everything he believed about Clara's death. But Isabella wasn't ready to accept it yet. He could see it in her eyes, in the way her expression oscillated between denial and doubt, but no matter how much she tried to run away, the truth was already revealing itself. That evening, Isabella left the restaurant early. The cold city air seemed to help her breathe better, but the feeling of unease wouldn't go away. She walked aimlessly for a few minutes, trying to organize her thoughts. Was Leo right? Had she really been in that restaurant before? These fragmented memories that were surfacing, were they real, or just products of a tired mind influenced by his words? The snow began to fall slowly, piling up on the ground. She stopped in front of a store window and looked at her reflection. She examined herself carefully, looking for something that seemed different. But all she saw was her own face. And then, suddenly, another memory came. A memory so vivid that it made her cling to the doorframe of the store so as not to lose her balance. The restaurant, a glass of wine in her hand, the gaze of a man across the table, his voice calling her name, Clara. The impact of the memory was like an electric shock running through her body. She turned sharply and started walking back to the restaurant, her heart racing. She needed answers. Now. Leo was in his office when he heard a hurried knock on the door. Before he could answer, Isabella walked in. Her eyes were wide, her breathing short. "I remembered something," she said, panting. Leo stood up quickly. "What?" She hesitated for a moment, still processing. "I don't know exactly what it was, but I was in the restaurant, holding a glass of wine, and someone called me Clara." The air disappeared from Leo's lungs. He took a step forward, his mind racing. "Are you sure?" She nodded slowly. "Yes." Leo felt his chest tighten. That was it, the confirmation he needed. He looked right into her eyes and said, without hesitation, "Isabella, you are Clara." The silence that followed was almost deafening. Isabella opened her mouth, but no words came out. She just stood there, staring at him, while everything inside her seemed to fall apart. Isabella's mind was spinning. She wanted to deny it. She wanted to say it was impossible. But then, why were those memories coming back? Why did that name seem so right? She staggered back, bringing a hand to her forehead. "No, this can't." Leo approached, his voice firm but gentle. "You survived the accident, Isabella, but you lost your memory." She shook her head, confused. "And that doesn't make sense." "It does, and deep down you know it." His words hit her like a blow, and for the first time, she began to accept the truth. The silence that hung between them was almost palpable. Isabella felt the weight of Leo's words sinking into her mind, messing with everything she believed to be true. Was she Clara? The idea seemed absurd, unacceptable, and at the same time, why was her heart beating so fast? Why did that name echo inside her like a long-forgotten memory? She needed air. Without saying a word, she turned and hurried out of the office, leaving Leo behind. The night was cold when Isabella left the restaurant. The biting wind made her skin shiver, but she hardly felt the cold. Her mind was in turmoil. Memories came to her in fragments, little flashes like blurred photos. A smile, a candle-lit dinner, the sound of laughter, and Leo's gaze, always him. She staggered over to a bench on the sidewalk and sat down, taking a deep breath. If this was true, if she really was Clara, then everything she knew about herself was a lie. She wasn't just Isabella, a woman with no past, no history. She had a life before the accident. She had a love, and that love was just a few meters away, waiting for her to remember it. Leo didn't follow her. He knew Isabella needed time, but inside him, everything seemed about to explode. He had spent years believing that he had lost Clara, and now she was there, alive, but with no memory of him. It was a cruel twist of fate, and at the same time, a miracle. He couldn't force her to remember, but he couldn't pretend that nothing was happening either. She needed to know, she needed to understand, and above all, she needed to feel. The clock struck almost midnight when Isabella returned to the restaurant. Leo was still there, sitting at the table where he usually drank his wine. He looked up when he saw her enter. She stopped in front of him, taking a deep breath. "I want to know more." Leo straightened up in his chair, his eyes fixed on her. "About what?" She swallowed. "About me. About us." Leo felt his chest tighten, but he nodded. "Come with me." The office was dark and silent when Leo turned on the light. He walked over to the desk drawer and took out a small photo album. Isabella stood motionless as he handed it to her. She stared at the aged leather cover, feeling a chill run down her spine. Then, hesitantly, she opened to the first page. Her heart stopped. There, right in front of her, was a photo of herself, or rather, of the woman Leo said she was, Clara. She was smiling, her eyes shining as she held Leo's hand. It was the same face, the same features, the same look. Isabella put a hand to her mouth, feeling the tears welling up in her eyes. It was real. It was true. She wasn't Isabella. She was Clara. And finally, she was beginning to remember. Isabella's world seemed to revolve around her. Each page of the album she turned was like a blow to her mind, bringing back fragments of a past that until then had seemed non-existent. She saw herself, or rather she saw Clara, in happy moments next to Leo, smiling, living a life she didn't remember having. But now, everything was coming back. The gestures, the words, the love. Tears ran down her face silently. Leo remained still, watching her, waiting. He knew that this moment wasn't about him. It was about her, about remembering who she really was, about choosing. The snow was falling softly outside as Isabella closed the album with trembling hands. She looked up at Leo, and in him she found everything she needed to know. He didn't say anything, but his eyes were filled with feelings, of hope, of fear, of love. "I remember," his voice came out in a whisper. Leo held his breath. "Of what?" She blinked slowly, absorbing every memory her mind finally allowed her to access. "Of us." Leo closed his eyes for a moment, allowing her words to hit him hard. She remembered. Not everything, but enough. And that was enough. The two of them left the office in silence. The restaurant was empty now, the lights lower, giving the atmosphere an almost ethereal air. Isabella walked up to the bar, ran her fingers along the marble top and smiled slightly. "I used to sit here," she murmured. Leo approached, standing next to her. "Yes, you always ordered red wine and complained that I served you glasses that were too full." She laughed softly, feeling the echo of that memory. "Because you did." His laugh was low, laden with nostalgia. She turned to him, now closer than they had been since this truth began to emerge. Leo's eyes roamed over her face, as if he wanted to memorize every detail. "I never thought I'd have you back." His voice was almost a whisper. Isabella bit her lip, hesitating. She was still dealing with everything. There were still pieces of the puzzle that needed to fit together, but there was a certainty inside her. She found Leo's hand and held it, feeling the warmth of his skin against hers. "I never thought you'd come back either." He squeezed her fingers lightly. "Do you want to start again?" The question hung in the air between them. She took a deep breath and smiled softly. "Yes, but not like Clara." Leo raised his eyebrows, confused. "What?" She looked at him with determination. "I want to start again, but as Isabella." Leo studied her for a moment. Then he smiled, because he understood. The past had brought them here, but the future would begin now, together.